This is a class that I've wanted to do for a very long time, for many years. This outline for this class has been sitting on the computer for like 3 years at least, and I always push it off. People always ask me, when are you going to talk about the Erev Rav? You are asking me many times, when are you going to talk about the Erev Rav? I say, I'll get to it, but I always push it off because it's a very dangerous subject, maybe the most dangerous. There's no way to talk about it without offending people. There's just no way. Because what you're essentially saying that it almost implies that a particular group of people or a particular ideology or a particular way of living is wrong and not kosher and against the Torah. So somebody is going to get offended by that. And even if you try to stay as neutral as possible, people are going to think that you're attacking them. And it's really important to remember that we're not attacking any people. We're not attacking any individual group. We're not labeling any group of people as they are the Erev Rav. That's not how it works. Because the Erev Rav is not a particular group of people. It's an ideology, like we briefly said last time. It's a certain mindset. It's a certain inappropriate, false mindset. And it can be found anywhere, across the religious spectrum, the political spectrum, the social spectrum. It's not in any one particular group. And throughout history, I said this last time as well, Erev Rav has been used as a slur against basically everybody and anybody. Whoever you don't like is Erev Rav, or whoever you oppose is Erev Rav. So in the 1600s, the Shabbatayans called the non-Shabbatayans Erev Rav, and those who opposed the Shabbatayans called the Shabbatayans Erev Rav. And later the Frankists were called Erev Rav, and they called those who aren't Frankists Erev Rav. And the Orthodox called Reformers Erev Rav, and the Reform called the Orthodox Erev Rav. And today it's very common that you hear the Charedim call the Zionists Erev Rav, right? The Israeli government's Erev Rav. That's very popular. That's a very popular belief in the ultra-orthodox world, and vice versa. And then people will say, but the ultra-orthodox are Erev Rav, right? And so everybody uses that term against everybody else. And that's why it's such a dangerous topic, and it's a term that you don't really want to talk about. And many just avoid it entirely. But we can't avoid it because it's really everywhere. The term itself goes all the way back to the Torah. It's in the Chumash. We read about it recently. And it starts from the Torah. It's mentioned in the Gemara, right? So the Talmud speaks about it. The Zohar speaks about it in many places. The Arizal speaks about it. So we want to go through all of these sources from the very beginning and work our way through it and really try to understand what the Erev Rav actually is. What is this ideology? Again, it's not a particular group of people. It's a certain mindset. And anybody can have that mindset, whether they're on the far left or on the far right, or we need to define exactly what this is. Okay, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's not a secret cabal. It's not a group of people that meets in a dark room, to plan how they're going to take over the world or how they're going to make Jews go astray or how they're going to pull people away from God. It has nothing to do with any of those things. It's just a particular false ideology that's always existed, going all the way back to ancient Egypt, to the Exodus. And most people who have that ideology are victims of the ideology. It's important to remember that. So if a person has the Erev Rav mindset, which we'll see what that is, usually it's not because it's not their fault that they have this. They're a victim of that mind. They've been kind of brainwashed almost. They've been taught this, often from childhood. And they don't know anything else. And so they're usually victims of this mindset. So it's not even their fault. And so our job is really to extricate people from that mindset and to show them that's really the point of this class, to understand what it is so that we can confront it and get rid of it. And that's the path to Geula, as the Zohar says, as we'll see. It's absolutely necessary to bring about the final redemption, to get rid of this false ideology, this false mode of thinking, which actually serves to divide us. As we saw a little bit last time, we saw one passage that mentions the Erev Rav in the Zohar, Raya Mehemna, which talked about a particular type of Erev Rav, and it says that they're connected to the Etzadat Tovera, to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. which is associated with death and division. So the Zohar over there said that the Erev Rav are ba'alei machloket, that they divide, they create division, tension, separation, exclusion. So we'll never have unity. To bring Geulah, we need unity. We need to bring the people together. But how can you bring the people together if you have this mindset that divides people and separates people? That they don't go together, right? So in order to actually achieve Geulah, we have to talk about the Erev Rav and understand it. And that's why I finally decided to do it now, after all these years of putting it off. We can't really put it off anymore. Now's the time. We're on the cusp of Geulah, we hope. And so hopefully this discussion helps, because we need to end this Erev Ravism. That's what I'm going to call it, Erev Ravism. So when we end Erev Ravism, then we'll be able to really unite. So the whole point of this, again, is not to sow division. Some people, at the end of the last class, where the class was really about Purim, but it's connected to Purim, and we talked a little bit about it. So most people, actually, it was an overwhelmingly positive response. Right? I got many emails, I don't know how many, hundreds, and only a few were negative. I think only one person actually attacked me for it, which is nice, only one. The majority of people were actually grateful that somebody's speaking about it and speaking up for the silent majority, because most people just don't talk about it. Some were asking, clarifying, like, don't you think by speaking about it like this, you're causing more division among Israel? Well, no, because again, the point is to unify. Right? We're talking about something that's causing the division. So the point of it is to bring more unity. And the only way to bring more unity is to get rid of the thing that causes the divide. Otherwise, we'll never have true unity. So this is not meant to sow division, God forbid. It's the exact opposite. It's meant to unify us. And the only way to unify us is if we can recognize what it is that divides us. And that's the Erev Rav mentality. So that's what we have to do. And we have to always remember that we're one people, like we discussed recently. Mi ke'amcha, ke'Yisrael go echad ba'aretz. Who is like your people? Israel are supposed to be a united people, one nation. And we are one nation. We are united all over the world. And so we have to just reinforce that unity and to get rid of what it is that divides us. So with that introduction, we can get into this. There's a lot to talk about. Probably going to take multiple sessions. I think we'll try to fit in as much as we can today, but I think it's going to take at least 2, maybe even 3 parts, because there's so much to talk about. So I hope people will actually listen to the whole thing, because sometimes people listen to a little bit and they stop and they don't get the whole picture. You have to listen to the whole thing. If you're going to commit to listening to this, then you have to commit to listen to everything to the very end. Otherwise, you're not going to get the whole picture and you're not going to understand this properly. So I hope people will actually listen and actually understand what's being said and not take words out of context, and to listen clearly to the whole thing. So people listen to it and recognize, if they're part of that ideology, that they'll recognize and say, oh shoot, I've fallen victim to the same improper thinking. And I hope they actually come out of it. That's the point of this. And even I hope many rabbis who listen to this will realize, hey, I've been trained under this ideology, and as a rabbi, I'm propagating this Erev Rav ideology. So I hope rabbis will listen to this and realize maybe they should rethink exactly their mode of teaching other people, because their responsibility is really on their shoulders. And I know a lot of people won't do that. Many people will deny it. And that's normal. There's like the 5 stages of grief. You've heard of the 5 stages of grief in psychology?
Denial.
Yeah. First is denial. You're going to deny. You're going to say, no, it's not true, right? And then the second stage is anger. Then you're going to get angry because deep down you know it's true, but then you don't know how to deal with it. So then the anger comes out. Then all the angry emails come and all the ad hominems attacks. And then you start bargaining. Try to start figuring it out. And then for some people, unfortunately, the next step is depression, but hopefully nobody falls into a depression. But ultimately, stage 5 is acceptance. Eventually you accept it, sooner or later, hopefully sooner. It would be really a shame if you had to wait till Mashiach comes and only then you accept it. By then it might be a little too late. So hopefully people understand the message and understand that this is all about unity, about bringing about Geulah, about understanding what it is that divides us, about understanding false modes of reasoning and how to detach from false modes of reasoning. So this is what we're going to do. Number one, we're going to look at where the term comes from and all the early sources that defined it and explained it. Then we're going to build on the bit of the Zohar and the Arizal that I talked about last time, and then look at the different types of Erev Rav. I mentioned last time briefly that there's 5 types of Erev Rav. So I don't think we're going to get to it today, but probably next time we're going to go through the 5 different types of Erev Rav mentality, or the way it manifests. It's one mentality, but it's manifest in 5 main different ways, and see how the ideology works and make it as clear as possible. And then I actually want to do something, a little case study, because my own personal theory is that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I think, understood the Erev Rav phenomenon very well. And I personally think, this is not something that I heard somewhere, it's just something that came to me over the years of learning about his life and going through reading his sichot and what he taught, is that he knew what the Erev Rav was, and that he tried actually to confront it, in a very subtle way. He hardly ever spoke about it. Even in leading up to this, I asked some of my Chabad friends who know the Rebbe like inside and out, what did he say about the Erev Rav? And most of them said, not much. Right? He rarely ever even mentioned the term. He spoke very little about it. But I think subtly, he actually knew it very well, and he was confronting it. And a lot of what he did is actually because he was trying to detach from that Erev Rav mindset and lead people out of it. So I also want to talk about the Lubavitcher Rebbe as a case study. Again, it's just my opinion. It's not something that I heard somewhere, but I think that's going to be very fascinating as well, to look at the Lubavitcher Rebbe as a case study. And obviously, I'm not a Lubavitcher. This is not to promote. I've been critical of Chabad, but I haven't been critical of the Rebbe, actually. And I think this is something that he did very well. No, I'm going to talk about it. I'll probably mention a few examples of it today, and then maybe later on we'll do an actual in-depth analysis of the Lubavitcher Rebbe and how he tried to fight the Erev Rav mindset. And along the way, we want to debunk all the myths surrounding the Erev Rav, and specifically false modes of reasoning. So if you remember last time, we said that Erev Rav is a da'at. It's connected to da'at, to knowledge. And even the Arizal even says the gematria of Erev Rav is 474, like da'at, because that's really their power. Their power is in twisting mental power, of twisting knowledge, twisting da'at, reasoning, using false modes of reasoning. And that's how they accomplish what they do. So we also have to learn about false modes of reasoning, the classic fallacies in philosophy, if you've ever learned them. So we also have to look at that and debunk some myths and false modes of reasoning, and then talk very practically, hopefully do that at the end of today, about the steps we can take, each one of us, to detach from the Erev Rav and to help to defeat this false ideology so that we can usher in the Geula.
Brian,
yeah.
Is there an English translation for that Hebrew term?
Erev Rav? Yeah, mixed multitude is how they translate it. But I'm going to go through it. We'll go through everything, all the different definitions and explanations of what it actually means. But the simple definition, the translation that you see in most sources is mixed multitude. A mixed multitude. We'll see where that comes from. And then we'll end with tying it into all the end of days phenomena happening now in prophecy and Geula. So that's what we have to do. Let's see how long it takes. I know, it's a tall order. Let's see. So let's start. So where does the term come from? Where is the very first time that Erev Rav actually appears?
Exodus 12.
Good, Exodus 12. Wow, you even know the chapter. You know the verse? Yeah, good. Towards the end, yeah. In Shmot, in Exodus chapter 12, in describing the Exodus, we read, Vayis'u b'nei Yisrael miRamses Sukkota. So the children of Israel left the city of Ramses, which is one of the cities that they built. The Torah tells us they built the city of Ramses. They didn't build the pyramids. The pyramids already existed. When the Israelites were in Egypt, the great pyramids in Giza were already there for a very long time. So common myth, I guess we're already into myth busting. The Jews never built the pyramids. It doesn't say anywhere that they built the pyramids. The pyramids had already been there for like 1,000 years beforehand. The Torah says clearly that they built 2 cities, Pitom and Ramses. So they left Ramses, it says here, and they went to a place called Sukkot. There was 600,000 men, Gvarim, Levad Mitaf, not counting the children and all the others, 600,000 fighting age men. And then it says, Vegam Erev Rav ala itam. And here it says, also, in addition to the Israelites, a mixed multitude, and Erev Rav came out of Egypt with them. Vetzonu bakar mikne kaved meod, and many sheep and lots of cows and lots of livestock. Okay. And right after that, it actually says, Veyofu et habatzek asher hotziu mimitzrayim ugot matzot. And here is where it actually says that they baked the dough that they had into matzot, ki lo chametz, because it didn't have time to ferment and to rise, ki golshu mimitzrayim, because they left Egypt in haste, velo yachlu leitma'ameh, vegam tzeda lo asu lahem. They didn't have time to get ready, so the dough hadn't risen, and they just grabbed it and went and made these thin matzot. Okay, so that's where it comes from. So it's appropriate to do this set of lessons now before Pesach because it actually connects to the Exodus and the whole Passover thing, and it'll enrich your Passover Seder, hopefully. So Rashi says, what is the Erev Rav? Rashi comments, Erev Rav is ta'arovet umot shel gerim. So it was a mixture of other nations that converted and joined the Israelites. Okay, so converts that joined the Israelites from a mixture of nations. The Ibn Ezra says, Me'anshei Mitzrayim she'itarev imahem. These were various Egyptians that joined. Ve'em ha'asafsuf. Power. Yeah. The Satan is getting nervous. There you go. So, Me'anshei Mitzrayim she'itarev imahem. Among the Egyptians that joined with the Israelites, Vehem ha'asafsuf shene'asfu aleim, and they are also called ha'asafsuf. You remember this term asafsuf also appears in the Torah. Later in the Torah, in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, chapter 11, it says, Ve'i ha'am ki mita'onenim, and the people were complaining, very much. God got mad at the people for complaining so much, and his anger was incensed. And it says later, V'asafsuf asher bekirbo, and the asafsuf, again another word for mixture, that was among them, ita'avu ta'ava, they had this great lust and this great desire. Vayashuvu vayifku gam b'nei Israel, and then they also made the children of Israel also want to desire things. What did they desire? Vayomru ki ami yochilenu basar. Who's going to give us meat? They were sick and tired of eating the manna, this food from heaven. They wanted a nice steak, right? They had a desire for some meat, and they started crying and complaining. And the asafsuf also made the Israelites also sin here. They started it. And the Torah here calls them originally ve'i ha'am ki mita'onenim. The people were complaining. Why does it say the people? And the Zohar explains, whenever you see in the Torah where it says ha'am, the people, without any other qualifier or name, that's referring to the Erev Rav. Anytime you see, if they can be called the Erev Rav, they can be called ha'asafsuf. And also, anytime you see ha'am, it's a good rule to keep in mind when you're reading the Torah. Anytime the Torah says specifically ha'am, doesn't say Am Yisrael or Bnei Yisrael or Beit Yaakov. It just says Ha'am. That means it's actually talking about the people, the other people, no, the non-Israelite people. So it's talking about those, the Erev Rav. And you'll notice that most of the cases in the Torah where people complained or committed a sin, most famously the golden calf, it specifically says some variation of Ha'am. It's the people that sin, meaning it was the Erev Rav, and then they inspired also Israel. They pulled Israel into sin with them, like it says here. That first the Asafsuf were crying, and then Gam Bnei Israel, and then they pulled Israel into it with them. So the Zohar says, Ella begin ha'u Erev Rav. So this Erev Rav, they joined, glued onto Israel, they tarvu ba'adayu, mixed in together with the Jewish people, with the Israelites. Karelon et ha'am stam. They are called ha'am stam, without any other term. Whenever you see ha'am, that's them. And it also says this, Kmodat Amar, it says in Exodus 32 with the golden calf, Vayigof Hashem et ha'am ala sherasu et ha'egel. So who made the golden calf? Ha'am. Torah says God punished ha'am for building the golden calf, for creating the golden calf. And it was the that came on, if you remember Aaron, they actually forced Aaron to make the golden calf. And it also says, Vayar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe. The people saw that Moshe was late coming down from Mount Sinai, and they thought he's gone. So they said, okay, make us gods, make us the golden calf. So it always uses the term ha'am. When you see ha'am, the Zohar says, that's a sign that it's talking about the Erev Rav. We'll notice also in the Bamidbar, a few chapters later, that whenever ha'am complain, you notice something very interesting. Oftentimes when the people complain, they are complaining that they want to go back to Egypt. So like it says in Bamidbar chapter 14, that Tisa kol ha'eda ve'etnu et kolam ve'ifku ha'am balayla ha'u. So this is after the sin of the spies. The spies came back from Israel and gave a false report. And it says who was crying and saying we don't want to go to Israel? Ha'am. Ha'am was scared. They did not want to fight for Israel. They said, no, we don't want to, let's go back. Let's go back to Egypt. Va'ilonu al Moshe ve'al Aaron. They complained to Moses and Aaron. And then it says, Kol bnei Israel. And they were able to make all of Israel, again, that Ha'am is pulling all of Israel along with them. Vayomru aleim, Kol ha'eda lum matnu be'eretz Mitzrayim. Would have been better for us to die in Egypt than to go to Israel. That's what they're saying. The Erev Rav is saying, better to go back to Egypt, or Oba midbar hazeh lum matnu. Better if we would have died here than go, and they don't want to fight for Israel. They'd rather just go back to their Galut. And they said one to another, Vayomru ish el achiv, nitna rosh v'nashuva Mitzrayma. Let's go back to Egypt. So another important thing to understand about the Erev Rav is the Galut mindset, the desire to stay in Egypt. That's another critical point of the Erev Rav. The first one is that the division part, the complaining, the division, dividing up the people, separating the people, drawing people, their fellows into sinful behavior and thinking, but also maintaining a Galut mindset. We don't want to go to Israel. We don't want to fight for Israel. It's better to stay subjugated in Mitzrayim. And we spoke many times before about the difference between having a Galut mindset versus a Geula mindset. And unfortunately, many people in Israel still have, in the people of Israel, and also in the land of Israel, still have a Galut mindset. Even today, people live in Israel, but they're really in Galut. You know, they talk like they're in Galut, they dress like they're in Galut, right? They transferred Eastern Europe to Israel, and they just transported the shtetl life into the Galut they brought into the Holy Land. It's this inability to detach from the Galut mindset. Now, the Zohar says that who let the Erev Rav join the Israelites? Who gave them permission to even come and join with the Exodus? Right, the Zohar says it was Moshe himself who let them in. Moshe actually took them in, and we're going to see why later on. And he believed that they could be redeemed. He actually said, no, there's sparks of holiness there, and we can rectify them. It's not all bad. The Erev Rav is not all bad. We can rectify them. And he believed that they could be redeemed. Unfortunately, he failed to. And the Zohar will even say, we're going to see this later, that this is the real reason why he was not given permission to go to Israel. He was not allowed to enter Israel and it says he will never come to Israel. Moshe won't come to Israel until he finishes the task of rectifying the Erev Rav.
So the Erev Rav is gone. That's only the day that Moshe will
resurrect. Right. Moshe will only be able to enter the Holy Land when the Erev Rav is rectified. Wow. Because his soul is actually intertwined with the souls of the Erev Rav. And we mentioned that briefly last time. The Arizal says this, the Zohar says this, that Moshe and the Erev Rav reincarnate in every generation over and over again. It's this great cosmic battle that spans all of history. So it'll only end at the end of days. And that's what's going to usher in the Messianic Age. Moshe thought they could be redeemed. They can be redeemed. We're now in the final generation, in the final redemption. Now is the time when they're going to be redeemed. And it's not going to happen if we don't all actually play our role and start talking about this and pull people out of this ideology, friends, family, whoever we know. Really, the message is for all of us. Let's help Moshe Rabbeinu get this job, this millennia-year-long conflict be resolved. That's the point of this shiur, really. The Zohar continues, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Erev Rav Ktiv velo Mitzrayim. They're called Erev Rav, they're not called Egyptians. They were various other peoples who lived in Egypt. Velo od ela dechulo idgzaru. They were all circumcised. The Erev Rav was also circumcised. V'cheivan deidgzaru lo ikrun Mitzrayim. And because they were circumcised, they weren't called Egyptians. Ve'al puma de Moshe kabilulon. It was Moses that, like we said, accepted them into the people. Ve'hainu ma de'amar ha'katuv. And this is why it says with the golden calf, what did God tell Moshe after the golden calf? God told him, Lech, red, go descend from the mountain, ki shichet amcha, your people, not my people, your people, shichet amcha, the people that you brought, to join the Israelites, the Erev Rav, they are the ones that built the golden calf, that created the golden calf. Right? God said, your people are sinning with the golden calf, not mine. It's not the Israelites, it's the Erev Rav. Really amazing. And if the Zohar is saying here that they were circumcised, why is that important to mention? Again, we're going to see later on. It was really important to mention because the Erev Rav is also connected to Avraham. The Zohar is going to have a whole explanation of why. You know how in the beginning in Bereshit, it says that God created the heavens and the earth? It says, Behi baram. Ele toldot ha-shamayim. You remember this? Shamayim v'aretz, Behi baram. That God created with them. And it says Behi Baram, our sages say Behi Baram is an anagram of Avraham. And there's a little hey there. You know how some letters in the Torah we write big, some letters we write small? The word Behi Baram has a little hey. So the Zohar has a whole exposition on that little hey. It's connected to the hey that Avraham got, because Avraham was called Avram, and then he became Avraham. So it's connected to that. It's connected to the 5 types of Erev Rav. It's connected to the hey of Moshe. So Moshe is Mem Shin, hey. The Arizal says that Moshe had a part of Shem, Mem Shin, Shem, and Hey from Hevel. So there's the Hey. It's all these Heys are connected. The Hey of Avraham, the Hey of Moshe, the 5 types of Erev Rav, Behi Baram, the creation of the heavens and the earth. We're going to go into that. That's much later. It gets more and more deep and profound. So the fact that they were circumcised is really important to mention here because they have a connection directly to Avraham. They are connected to the Avraham's covenant of circumcision. And Moshe brought them in to finish the refinement process. And it continues, the Zohar. The Torah says, V'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. Right? Famous verse, Chamushim alu, and lots of commentary on what does that mean. Chamushim alu, that the b'nei Yisrael, that the children of Israel came out of Egypt. Chamushim. What is Chamushim? What does Chamushim mean? Usually the way it's translated, the Pshat, Chamushim means armed. That they came out with weapons. They actually did take armaments with them. And that explains how they were able to fight Amalek shortly after. Because if you remember, right after the Exodus, Amalek comes and confronts them, and they battle Amalek. How could they battle Amalek if they were these poor slaves that just came out of Egypt? So the Torah makes sure to mention, Chamushim alu, they came out with arms. They took weapons to protect them. That's how they were able to fight later on in the wilderness. That's the simple pshat. But also there's deeper meaning here, because what's the root of chamushim? What's chamush? It's chamesh, 5. That's from this, our sages derived the number of people that came out of Egypt, that the number of people that were in Egypt, and chamushim means only 1/5 came out of Egypt. We've talked about this before, that there's 600,000 men. If you count the women and children, we usually say there were 3 million. And because it says chamushim alu, as if 1/5 came out of Egypt, so there's this idea, this tradition, that there were 15 million Israelites in Egypt. But out of the 15 million, only 3 million came out. That's what chamushim means.
Couldn't that also mean, if it's 600,000, but also 3 million, that's also 1/5, exactly.
Right, that's true. Very true. Right. You could also interpret it like that, yes. That it was 3 million total, the men was 1/5.
That was counted.
The classic way to interpret it, though, is that 600,000 men, 3 million altogether, and only 1/5 of the Israelites actually came out of Egypt. The others perished. I guess they had too much of that Galut mindset, and they also perished in the plagues because they weren't worthy to be redeemed. That's one tradition, that there was 15 million. What's amazing about that, though, is that according to the Kabbalists in the Arizal, the final generation is a reincarnation of the Exodus generation. So it's interesting to note that today you have in the world 15 million Jews again. And if I think about how many are actually connected to Torah and Hashem and doing mitzvot, Shabbat, kosher, how many? Maybe 20%. So it's almost like we have the same ratio of 3 million to 15 million, like in ancient times. Only 3 million were able to be redeemed. So that's the verse, Chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael. Okay, good. So different explanations for what it means. They were armed. A fifth came out. But now the Zohar continues. What does that mean? Chad chamisha havu. That the Erev Rav, it's talking about the Erev Rav here. That a fifth of the Israelites were Erev Rav. The Zohar is suggesting here that chamushim alu means that a fifth of all those that came out of Egypt were Erev Rav. Rabbi Yossi Omer, chamisha mi-Yisrael vechad minayhu. For every 5 Israelites, there was one Erev Rav. So maybe a sixth were Erev Rav. Okay, so he's either a fifth or a sixth. Rabbi Yehuda says, chamushim means echad mi-chamishim. No, it was a 50th. Not a fifth, but a 50th. So you can say it was 120,000. You can say it was 12,000, depending on which number you're going to use. If you're going to use the 15 million number, then it could be 3 million were Erev Rav in total, in Egypt. Or if it was a 50th, it would be 300,000. I know, there's a lot of math here. So if you're going to use the 3 million number, so a fifth of 3 million is 600,000 or 60,000. So there's all these possibilities. Okay, so anywhere from 60,000 to like 3 million altogether, depending on which number exactly you want to use. So if you want to parallel it to what's going on today in real time, that there's 15 million Jews again, do we say that it's a fifth of the Jewish population that might be victims of the Erev Rav ideology, which would be 3 million people? Or is it a 50th? Right, so Rabbi Yehuda is saying it's a 50th. I hope it's a 50th. Right, maybe 300,000 maybe that can be said to have this. Who knows? Maybe not. Whatever it is, but that's a possibility. It's a possibility. If we parallel the Exodus generation to today's generation, it's just interesting that there's 15 million in both.
1/5 or 150, it's still enough to do damage.
Yeah, the damage that the Erev Rav does. Again, it's not a conspiracy theory that the Erev Rav's trying to destroy the world or something. No, the Erev Rav does damage to themselves. That's the problem, right? It's self-destructive. That's the problem. Exactly. So we have to remember that this is like you're helping that person who's trapped in that ideological prison more than anything else. It's dangerous because it's like a virus that replicates, and so it sucks people into it. That's why it's dangerous.
It does affect, like even with the calf, right? I mean, eventually we also got
exactly
because of that.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. It spreads like a virus. We have to be careful not to succumb. That's actually what I have here, with the Zohar. It's this exact point that you make, which is that anybody can succumb to the Erev Rav ideology, including the leaders of the people. And that's what the Zohar says here about Aaron himself. Aaron was the Kohen Gadol. He was the high priest. He was the leader. He was Moshe's brother, older brother. How is it possible that Aaron built the golden calf, that created the golden calf? They came to him and said, make for us gods. And it seems to say, the Torah seems to say that Aaron created the golden calf. We know that he wasn't really the one that did it, and we're going to talk about that. But it was under his supervision, and he let it happen. And the Torah blames him for it. How could it be? And the Zohar says something amazing. The Zohar says, Bachar Rabbi Shimon. Shimon bar Yochai cried. Amar, he said, I chasida kadisha. You holy chassid, holy pious one. Aaron mshicha de Eloah Rabbah. The anointed one of God. Aaron was the anointed of God, anointed to be the high priest. How could it be? Bechasidutach naflu kama me'ama kadisha. So many of the holy people fell because of you. Because you couldn't, ve'ant lo haveit yada leistamra. You didn't know how to protect yourself from the Erev Rav. You weren't able to confront them. And in your kindness and piety, you let them take you over. And because of you, so many naflu kama me'ama kadisha. So many holy souls of Israel succumbed to this ideology and fell prey to it. Rabbi Shimon cried that Aaron himself fell to this. So it's important to remember this because a lot of people ask me, even after the last class, are you accusing of the Gdolei Israel of being Erev Rav or colluding with the Erev Rav? I'm not accusing anybody, right? But what we have to understand is that even Gdolim can fall victim to the Erev Rav. Like Aaron himself, who could be greater than, like Rabbi Shimon says, Mashiach de Eloah Rabbah, the anointed one of God, the high priest. Is anybody today on the level of Aaron? Nobody is. And yet even Aaron, in his piety and his kindness, wasn't able to stop it and was succumbed to the Erev Rav ideology. So even leaders, yes, can sometimes make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, right? And they can be abused by the Erev Rav, and they can be twisted and manipulated. So it's important to remember that too, right? Some people ask that question. Well, what about the leaders of Israel? Why don't they say anything? Well, maybe they can't, right? Maybe they can't say anything, right? I think I mentioned to you when I was in Yerushalayim now a month and a half ago, I met with one really great Chacham who many people respect in Yerushalayim. He asked for me to come and speak to him. So I made my effort, made my way to go there, and I spoke to him about, I'm not going to say his name, but he's very well known, big Chacham, Haredi, in the heart of the Haredi world. And we had a nice conversation. And when I brought up all these issues, which we're going to talk about, I said, why don't you speak out about it? He agreed with me. And I said, why don't you speak out about it? He says, I can't. What do you mean you can't? He says, well, what's the point? They're going to immediately silence me and excommunicate me and cancel me, and nothing's going to come out of it. Right? That's what he said. This is a Haredi, big Haredi Rav who's at least twice my age. Okay, in the heart of the Haredi world in Yerushalayim. But I asked him, don't you feel a responsibility to speak out? He says, I can't. They're gonna shut me down immediately, and then there's no point. I'm gonna lose what influence I have now will be finished. The Zohar says that in the final generation, the Erev Rav will be the strongest because they know it's the last duel. So it's going to be the most difficult time, and there's going to be very few that will speak up. Right? Everybody's afraid. People are afraid to speak. We're in a cancel culture. Cancel culture is in the whole world, but also in the Jewish world, in the religious world. So people are afraid to speak up. We have to remember that even big rabbis can succumb to it, and they're afraid to say anything. Right? Like this person, for obvious reasons, I can't say who it was, but people are afraid to speak. People who with influence and a lot more Torah and connections than I do, and who are much older than I am and wiser, are just afraid to speak. So I'm speaking on their behalf. So what happened with the golden calf? So Rabbi Shimon cried. Rabbi Shimon cried about it. What happened really with the golden calf? So the Zohar begins. Amai kara lon Erev Rav. Why are they called the Erev Rav? Where did this term really come from? Erev Rav. Erev means, you can translate as a mixture, but also the pshat, simple meaning, Erev means evening. Rav means great. Okay. Why are they called Erev Rav? Ela kol charashin da Mitzrayim havu, because they were in Egypt. They were the charashin. They were the magicians, the wizards. Yeah, exactly. The chartumim. They were the people who were involved in the dark arts. Sorcerers. Uverei shehon. At their head was two people. What's their name? The leaders of the Erev Rav, the leading Egyptian. Good. Yunus and Yumbrus. Okay, Yunus and Yumbrus. That was their name. And there's an insertion here into the Zohar, a comment, Ulai Eluem Yochanai or Yochnai or Yochani umamre in Shenizkeru b'Shmot Rabbah. In the Midrash, in Shmot Rabbah, it actually mentions two people named Yochani and Mamre. I'll read to you the Shmot Rabbah. In Shmot Rabbah it says, V'yashlichu ish Mateu, when the Torah says that Moshe and Aaron came before Pharaoh and threw, if you remember, they threw their staffs and they threw the staff and it turned into a snake. And here, Amru Yochani u'Mamre leMoshe, Pharaoh's magicians, Yochani and Mamre, told Moses, Teven ata machnis le'ofriim. Are you bringing straw to a place that sells straw, essentially?
Ice to an Eskimo?
Yeah, you're trying to sell ice to an Eskimo, to use that. I don't know if that's appropriate. Is that culturally appropriate to say now? Politically correct? Till you say Eskimo? I don't know. So yeah, it's like trying to sell ice to an Eskimo. Why are you bringing us straw to the place that sells straw? We're the magicians. You're bringing magic to the place of magic. And Moshe said, Amar lehem, lemata yarka shakol. So he said, to a vegetable market, bring vegetables. Right? What do you want to sell some vegetables, you go to a vegetable market. That was Moshe's reply. So he's using their art against them. And veivla mate Aaron et matotam. And then, as we know, the staff of Aaron swallowed up the staff of the Egyptians. But the two Egyptians, the Pharaoh's head sorcerers, were called Yochani and Mamre. And the Zohar, there's a possibility some identify them as Yunus and Yumbrus, who was the head of the Erev Rav that built the golden calf. So it's actually possible that Pharaoh's own magicians, they were so, I guess, amazed by the miracles of Egypt that they joined the Israelites as part of the Exodus generation. Or they did it not with any positive intention at all, and they came as secret agents, as double agents or something, to corrupt the people in the wilderness. So it's possible. But they're called Yunus and Yumbrus. And what do? They make their magic in the evening, at nighttime. And the Zohar explains exactly which hours, 6 hours, 9 hours, we're not going to get into it. But Dehainu Erev Rav Rava. So the root of Erev Rav is actually that Erev does mean evening here because they do their magic in the evening. They're more powerful at night. So there's also that etymology, that explanation for Erev Rav, that it's associated with Erev Rav Rava, the great night of when the sorcerers do their magic. So they did various magical things at night. The leaders of the Erev Rav, and they're Yunus and Yumbrus who built the golden calf. So you can learn from this another Erev Rav quality. Another issue with the Erev Rav ideology, which we've spoken about a lot in the past, which is the obsession with magic and superstition, and dark arts, and necromancy, and channeling the dead, and speaking to the dead, and writing letters to the dead, and doing all kinds of sgulot, and kameot, and this a magical cure for this, and a magical cure for this, right? It's all of that irrational, nonsensical, superstitious, magical stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with the Torah, nothing. But the Erev Rav likes to tell you, they want to sell you that this is somehow Torah, this is Kabbalah, right? It's Kabbalistic, it's a Kabbalistic thing, trust me. Give me the money, I'll give you the Kameh. It's Kabbalistic. It's going to change your life. No, it won't. There's nothing Kabbalistic about it, right? Kabbalah is very rational. It's very scientific. Today, a lot of the Kabbalah that you hear is junk Kabbalah. It's black magic and superstition. Nothing to do with authentic Kabbalah.
Kabbalah with a Q.
Whatever you want to call it. You can spell it with a C, with a Q. It doesn't matter how you spell it. But a lot of people will spell it with a K, and it's complete nonsense. Right? Kabbalah is totally scientific, rational. If you look at the early Kabbalistic sources, there's nothing irrational about it. It's very straightforward, it's very scientific, it's very empirical, it's very philosophically rigorous. A lot of scholars will compare the original Kabbalah to Neoplatonism. And in fact, the ancient Greeks knew it. Because Numenius, one of the ancient Greek philosophers, he even said, who is Plato if not Moses speaking Greek? Plato came 1,000 years almost after Moses. Plato's ideas, you can find them in the Torah, right? So Plato's ideas were very mystical, metaphysics, all that stuff, but it really comes from the Torah. That's the real authentic Kabbalah. The Greeks took metaphysics ultimately from the Torah, directly or indirectly. That's where it comes from. So our authentic Kabbalah is deeply rational, philosophical, empirical, scientific. There's nothing illogical about it. So if somebody's telling you that there's something, teaching you something Kabbalistic and it sounds crazy, it's probably because it is crazy. It's probably not Kabbalah, right? It's a red flag. And I've seen a lot of it over the years of people saying, this is Kabbalistic. And if you look at the origin of it, it's all from the last couple of 100 years, and has no actual authentic source. And oftentimes you'll find that the source is bichlal pagan and not Jewish. So it's important to remember that as well. That authentic Kabbalah is actually very scientific and rational. And the Erev Rav is associated with irrational, superstition, magic, black magic, all that stuff. That's Erev Rav also. Another red flag of Erev Rav mindset. The Zohar continues. Miyad vayakhel ha'am al Aaron. This is where the Torah says that Ha'am came to Aaron. Remember, Ha'am means the Erev Rav. They confronted him. And why did they come to Aaron? Amai al Aharon, begin leit kalala besitra deyamina, because they can attach to him. He represents the right side, the positive side, the good side, and they're going to use him, manipulate him to do their bidding. That's how the Erev Rav can even take a gadol and turn him into their pawn. They drop it, they get legitimacy. Oh, you see, look, Aaron himself is with us. He's helping us create the golden calf. It gives them legitimacy to connect themselves to a genuine Gadol B'Yisrael. Because they are smola, they're from the Sitra Acha, they're from the left. Uvegin de Levi Kalil Beyamina, they're attaching to the right side. Itkanshu al Aaron, they gathered around Aaron. Veyomru elav kuma selanu Elohim, and they said, come make for us gods. They want gods, right? This is a religious thing. This is not secular, they're not atheists, right? This is Avodah Zarah. It's still religious, it's not secular. Aaron letavid kavan. Of course, Aaron had good intentions, and he was trying to somehow get out of this difficult situation. But they were able to overcome him. And Ella sagiin havu meIsrael deishtatfu behadaihu beliba. But there were among Israel that unfortunately succumbed and joined with the Erev Rav and committed this sin. Uvegin kach kadata Moshe, and that's when Moshe came. That's why when Moshe came, itztarich levrara ulilbana le'ama kadisha me'u chova. Moshe had to purify the people from that sin, from the golden calf, because they had mixed in. The Erev Rav started it, but then the Israelites joined in, and so Moshe had to purify them. Ve'ashkelon shakiu, and the Torah says he made a certain drink. If you remember, he made the people drink it. Those who were guilty died, kind of like the sotah procedure. Moshe did like a mini sotah, right? He ground it up and he made them drink. You remember this? They drank the solution and the guilty ones died. Ad deidbriru kulo velo ishtar ba'u psolet klal. So Moshe was able to then purify the Israelites and get rid of all the dross from among them. And now the Zohar goes on to say that Yunus and Yumbrus made the golden calf, not Aaron directly, but Yunus and Yumbrus. And where did they come from? Inun Rashain Chayavin Charashin, they are Benoi de Bilam Chayava. They are the sons of the wicked Bilam. Okay, Yunus and Yumbrus were the sons of Bilam. Remember the sorcerer who was equal to Moshe. A Gentile sorcerer who was almost as great as Moshe. And they were also descendants of Bnei Banoi de Lavan Rashia. They were also descendants of Lavan the Aramean, who had tricked Yaakov so many times. If you remember, we talked about this before, when Yaakov says that Lavan tricked him aseret monin, 10 times. And our sages say that's referring to the 10 types of idolatry and necromancy and sorcery that the Torah mentions. The Torah lists 10 types of sorcery. We spoke about it in the Noahide laws class because it's the same 10 in the Noahide laws as part of the umbrella under the category of idolatry. There's 10 types of idolatry and sorcery. Lavan knew them all. He tried them all against Yaakov. Yaakov was able to defend himself. Bilam was his descendant. Yunus and Yumbrus also, they're all descended from each other. The Arizal says Lavan was reincarnated in Bilam. The Lamed Bet of Lavan, Lamed Bet, right? Lavan, Lamed Bet Nun, Lav, reincarnated in Bilam, Bet Lamed Ain Mem. We talked about that in the reincarnation class. It all actually comes from the soul of Hevel, Cain and Abel. We talked about this before, that the Hay of Hevel ended up in Moshe. It's the same Hay, the good part. The Bet Lamed was the not so good part, reincarnated in Lavan, and then in Bilam, and then in Naval. You remember this? Talked about this in the reincarnation class. So it's all connected. So Yunus and Yumbrus are descendants of Bilam, descendants of Lavan, and ultimately it all comes from Hevel. That's why the soul of Moshe is intertwined with the soul of the Erev Rav, and only Moshe can really rectify them. And the Arizal says, Inyan ha'egel tzarich ladat. So this is Rav Chaim Vital writes in Shara Psukim, the teachings of the Arizal, explains how they manipulated dat. So Inyan ha'egel with the golden calf, tzarich ladat kavanat ha'erev Rav ma'ita. What was the Erev Rav trying to do? Ba'asutam ha'egel, in making the calf. Ech em min hasigim ve'hazuhama shel Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom. So the Erev Rav, again, like we just said, has the same spiritual root as Moshe, but the negative part of it. It's that it really originates with Hevel. But there's the good part of it and the not so good part of it. And the Erev Rav are connected to the Zuama and the Sigim, the dross and the impure part of that same soul, the contaminated part. Asher nishmato hayta min hadat atzmo dezeir anpin. The soul of Moshe came from Da'at. Remember in the Sfirot, Keter is Dat, right? Keter is sometimes Dat. Remember this? Keter Chochma Bina is Chochma Bina Dat, right? So Moshe's soul stems from Dat, And so is the Erev Rav. It comes from the place of Da'at and the Sfirot. Adayin haya b'hem ta'arovet nitzotzot kedusha, and they do have some holiness mixed in, like we said earlier. That's another explanation for Erev Rav, a mixture. It's a mixture of good and evil. It's etz adat tov vera. It's a mixture of good and evil. V'lachen nizdarez Moshe bechol kocho, and that's why Moshe was very quick to try with all his power leachnis ha'erev Rav tachat kanfei Shechina. He tried his best to bring the Erev Rav under the Shechina, connect them to Hashem, to purify them, to get rid of the dross, to take the pure out, to get rid of the klipot, the impure husks, and take out the nitzotzot. Because there is holiness in the Erev Rav too. There is some... Right. Moshe was trying to rectify them, and only he could, because he actually comes from the same spiritual root as they, from Da'at, from the high Da'at and the Sfirot. The Arizal says what we said earlier in another place, De'atid Moshe leitgalgala bechol dora v'dora, that Moshe reincarnates in every generation, v'hu menoetzu nivzeh b'nei Erev Rav, and he's always going to be hated by the Erev Rav, because there's this cosmic battle, who also amit galgalim gamken bechol dor v'dor. The Erev Rav and Moshe reincarnate. This replays itself in every generation over and over again, and the Erev Rav is always opposing Moshe and trying to stop him, and he's always trying to rectify them in every generation. There's this cosmic struggle. עד שיוכלו גלגולי הערב רב, תמיד הוא מתגלגל ומנועץ בתוכם בגלותה בתרא. It's always going to keep coming back until the Erev Rav is finished at the end of days. So it's important again to remember another myth to clarify. The Erev Rav is not all evil. It's not all wickedness and evil. It's a mixture. It's a mixture of good and evil. There is a lot of goodness there. There is a lot of holiness in the Erev Rav too. Sometimes you see real mitzvot, real chesed, Torah, kindness, chokhmah. Yeah, it's a mixture. It's a mixture. And we're trying to purify the good and take out the bad. It's not all bad. It's important to remember that.
Some Erev Rav that are just complete off the better?
Not necessarily. Could be. But there is a mixture of good and evil. So we shouldn't think, oh, well, there's a lot of good there. Can't be that there's Erev Rav ideology in there. There could be. It's a mixture. So you have to know how to separate the good from the bad. That's what Moshe was trying to do. That's what Mashiach is going to do. That's the whole point. In another place on Parashat Balak, the Arizal adds, Ki Bilam hu b'chinat hara shel Moshe. Again, Bilam came from the same spiritual root as Moshe, but from the negative side. V'lachen be'umot ha'olam kam umanu Bilam. He came from among the Gentiles. He was called Bilam, which means Belo Am. He didn't have a particular nation that he was a part of. He was this vagabond that went all over the place. He was in Moab. He was in Egypt. He was a prophet on behalf of all the Gentiles. He was the anti-Moshe. But he came from the same spiritual root as Moshe, but from the negative part of it. Ve'ina Moshe hu min hadata elion de zeir anpin. Like we said earlier, Moshe is from that supernal dat. Ve'lachen nikra elion. That's why he's also called Elion, the supernal one. And כי כבר ידעת כי בלעם הוא מהקליפה שכנגד הדת. Bilam is from the negative, the klipa of dat. And that's why he knew, that's why the sages said, Yodea dat Elion, that Bilam knew God, could tap into God's knowledge. He knew God's da'at. Bilam himself could tap into the divine knowledge. He was a really high prophet as well, but in a negative way. Ve'ine banav Yunus ve'yumbrus gam hem min hadat. So of course his children are also connected to dat. And all of the Erev Rav, their spiritual root is in dat. Ve'em hayu rashim shel Erev Rav. Yunus and Yumbrus were the heads of the Erev Rav. Ve'lachen Erev Rav begimatria dat. As we said earlier, the gimatria of Erev Rav, 474, is equal to dat. Because that is their power. Their power is mental power. It's psychological. It's being able to twist people, to convince people that they have the truth, to convince people that they know God's knowledge, that they have dat, that they have the Torah knowledge, that they know what God is thinking. Like Bilam knew what God is thinking. He was connected to supernal dat as well. But as a group, the Erev Rav their power is mental. It's a mental manipulation. It's an ideology. It's a mindset. So it's very easy to confuse false dat with true dat. The dat of Moshe versus the dat of Bilam. You don't know. Is it genuine dat or not? Very difficult to figure out. You see that the Erev Rav is very religious, like we said last time. They're not secular. It's a common mistake. Probably the biggest mistake people say about the Erev Rav is that the Erev Rav they're secular, they're atheists, they're trying to pull people away from Torah observance and believing in Hashem? Not quite. Yes, they lead people astray, but not necessarily to atheism. The Erev Rav cannot be atheist by definition. The Erev Rav is very religious. They claim to know God. They're connected to the tree of knowledge. They know, like the Zohar said last time we looked at it, that they know Isur veheter, Tuma v'tahara. They know all about what's permitted and forbidden and pure and impure. So Erev Rav is not a secular thing. It's a religious thing. And the Zohar even says they were circumcised and everything. They look very, very religious. They know all about it. They were the ones that said, Ella Elohecha Israel. Here, Israel, look, we'll tell you what God is. We'll tell you who God is. We'll tell you what God wants. God wants you to worship the golden calf. Right? So they're not saying there's no God. They're saying, we'll tell you who's God. Listen to us. We know God, right? So the Erev Rav claim to be religious and close to God and know God and to have dat, because they do have dat. They are connected to Etz Hadat and to Dat Elyon. So it's impossible for a secular Zionist or for the secular Israeli government to be Erev Rav. That doesn't mean that they're right. There's many other forms of evil. Right? Erev Rav is not the only type of wickedness. And like we said, Erev Rav actually has a lot of good mixed into it. A person can be evil and not be Erev Rav. And a person can be evil and not be Amalek. There's many different types of evil. So we have to be careful with that. Not to label anything evil, oh, that's Amalek, or that's Erev Rav. No, not necessarily. And I obviously don't agree with a lot of what the secular Israeli government does. Most of what it does, yes, of course. But that doesn't mean that they're Erev Rav. Right? So it's important to remember that. We can disagree with somebody and say, no, you're wrong, and you might even be evil without them being Erev Rav. Erev Rav is a very specific type of ideology. It's a specific mindset, and it's a religious one. It's not a secular one. It's one that claims to know God. And just as I said that I would speak about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, because the Lubavitcher Rebbe, of the few times that he did speak about the Erev Rav, this is one thing that he said as well. Don't confuse the Erev Rav with secular. He said secular people are tinok shenishba. They don't know any better. They're atheists because they don't know. They never learned Torah. They grew up secular. Most of the Israeli leadership, the Zionist leader, the secular Zionist leadership, they just didn't know. They were raised in very secular, socialist, sometimes communist ideology. They didn't know anything. So the Lubavitch Rebbe would say they're in the category of a tinok shenishba. If they're wicked and wayward, it's because they don't know any better. Right? Very different. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, of course, broke with earlier tradition of his predecessors and did collaborate with the state of Israel and did meet with the Israeli leadership. And he met with prime ministers all the time and Israeli generals and advised them and supported them. He never explicitly called himself a Zionist, but he also never called himself an anti-Zionist, right? Unlike other Hasidic groups who were very staunchly anti-Zionist, he was not. And he did collaborate with the state very openly and very publicly, and had very warm relationships with Israel's secular leadership. Which is, again, he broke with tradition when he did that, because his father-in-law, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, was vocally anti-Zionist. So this was a change that the Lubavitcher Rebbe made.
In today's political climate, if people were to listen to the Lubavitcher, they would think he's a right-wing extremist. Probably.
Maybe, because the Lubavitcher Rebbe was opposed to the Oslo Accords, and he was right. He was right. He foresaw that Oslo would be a disaster, and it was. He foresaw that it would fail, and he was 100% right, because there were rabbis at the time, including Rav Ovadia, who wanted to give Oslo a chance. And I understand him. He saw it as a pikuach nefesh, like if we can save lives, let's give peace a chance. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said, it's not going to work. You can't make peace with people who have no interest in peace. And we also have no precedent to give away the Holy Land. The Jew has no permission to give away Holy Land. So he turned out to be right, and Rav Ovadia admitted that he was wrong about it after. So it's interesting also to bring up the Lubavitcher Rebbe here, that he also understood this, that Erev Rav is not secular. Secular could be, is wayward and whatever, but for other reasons. It's not Erev Rav. So the Erev Rav always presents itself as religious, and often even more religious than you, holier than thou. We know. We have Dat Elyon. We know God. You don't. And that's why they can dupe people into it, and they can even dupe the high priest. Even Aaron HaKohen was duped into it, like the Zohar says. In fact, the Zohar says, not only did they dupe Aaron into it, but Aaron was punished terribly for succumbing to the sons of Bilam. Do you know what was the punishment? Think. Midah keneged midah. Yeah, because Aaron lost his own two sons. So the Zohar says something amazing. Amar le kutshabrichu. God told Aaron, Aaron trein charashin ilein mashchulach lemadavahu. These two sons of Bilam, these two sorcerers, were able to pull you into to do their bidding. They were able to manipulate you, the Gadol Ado, the greatest person here, the anointed high priest. And they were able to suck you in and manipulate you to do this thing. Chayecha, by your life, Trein benach iplun. Your own two sons will then die. Ve'al chovada itpaskun, and it's because of that sin that Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, were killed in that fire that came out of God. Ado dichtiv uve'aron itanaf Hashem me'od le'ashmido. It says in Deuteronomy that God got really angry at Aaron and le'ashmido, wanted to destroy him. Mai le'ashmido, Ilain Benoy. Lashmido means he destroyed him through his children, because it says in Amos, the prophet Amos says, V'ashmid piryo mima'al dipri davarnash banoi inun. It brings a derivation from the book of Amos, when God says, I will destroy your fruit, and using the word lashmid, that God destroyed Aaron's fruit. And it was like a measure for measure. You listen to these two sons of Bilam, you lost your own two sons. Incredible. He was on a very high level. God held him to a very high degree of responsibility. And so he was punished for it really seriously.
Can I ask you a question? I know we're also on time right now, but how do we rectify like something like that, where you're punished by your children, but then you go to like Ezekiel, he says that the fathers don't, or the sons don't bear the sins of the father.
Right, we talked about this before. Nadav and Avihu had their own reasons for being killed.
Yeah.
But Aaron still suffered. This is the beauty of Hashem, of how he's able to actually string everything together, meaning Nadav and Avihu were meant to die anyways, right, for their own sins. But why did Aaron have to suffer the loss of his sons? Because of this. Okay. Right. So it still works. Okay. Every suffering is exact. Right? Nobody suffers for somebody else's sins. That's clear. Yecheskel ish becheto yumat. Everybody dies for their own sins. Yeah. But God finds a way to make it work that, if you need to suffer, you'll suffer, and everybody gets exactly what they deserve. That's what the sages say, that God is mezavek zivugim. What's God doing since creation? That's all he's doing. Mezavek zivugim, he's just connecting, intertwining. This person needs to do this to that person. This person he's going to have to be in a car accident there because he did that. That person needs to suffer a car accident because he hit there. And that person went there, and this person did there. And it's just constant connecting all the nodes and making sure everything is, it's crazy.
What a computer.
Yeah. Right, that's what I'm saying. They had their own sins for which they had to die. Absolutely. Nadav and Avihu deserved to die for their own sins, for sure. But why did Aaron have to suffer for losing his sons? He also gets suffering, right? A person loses his children, God forbid, that's suffering for him. Okay, my children sinned and it's their fault, fine. But why do I have to suffer because of it, right? So even that suffering is deserved. You see what I mean? Hashem orchestrates it all. Key point from this, I think, from this story, the Zohar is saying the sons of Bilam and the sons of Aaron, don't lose your own children to the Erev Rav. That's the important thing here. Because often who suffers is the children. The parents mean well, but then they expose their children to the Erev Rav. They enroll their children in Erev Rav institutions and schools. I'll talk more about that later. You have to be careful who you entrust your children with. That's how this ideology perpetuates itself. And then people suffer, and then people are victims of it, and people are abused by it, and then, what happens. So make sure you're very on top of where your kids go to school, and that they're not exposed to these things. And we still have to clarify exactly what these things are. The Arizal also adds, this is like an interesting side point, that Aaron had to reincarnate also to fix this. It's not only what the Zohar says that he lost his children, his two sons, but also he had to reincarnate and rectify. There's a beautiful passage in Shara Gilgulim where Aharon was himself a reincarnation of somebody before. You know who?
Melchizedek?
No. Aaron was a reincarnation, Ki'u Haran, the brother of Avraham. Remember, Avraham had two brothers, Nachor and Haran. And remember the story, King Nimrod was going to throw Avraham into the fiery furnace and said, recant your heresy, your monotheism, worship my gods, or I'm going to throw you into the flame. Avraham said no, and so he was thrown into the flames, and God miraculously saved him. According to tradition, he was 52 years old at that time. It was in the Jewish year 2000, and that's when God first actually came to him and saved him from the flames miraculously. His brother was there, and the famous midrash that his brother was also asked, whose side are you on? Are you going to be with your brother? And Haran didn't really believe in Hashem. He was still an idolater at heart. But once he saw that Abraham was saved from the flames, he said, okay, I'll be saved from the flames too. Okay, I choose Abraham. And they threw him into the flames and he died. Because his faith wasn't pure. He did it just because Abraham did it. But in his heart, he was still an idolater. So he was put to the test, Haran, to see if he was really going to be able to resist idolatry and sacrifice himself for the true faith, and he failed that test. So Haran ba letaken chet Adam harishon, and Haran himself was a reincarnation to rectify the sin of Adam harishon she'avad avodah zarah, because Adam harishon also had a lack of faith in Hashem, and he's described as if he did avodah zarah with his sin. ולא די שלא תיקן, אלא שגם אתה לא האמין בהשם, אלא עד שיצא אברהם מכבשן האש, ולכן נשרף הרן באור כסדים. Haran died in Ur Kasdim because he didn't have real faith in Hashem, just like Adam didn't have faith in Hashem. He died, ואחר כך נתגלגל באהרון. Aharon is Aleph, Haran. That's the spiritual root of his name. Why is he called Aharon? It doesn't mean anything in Hebrew. What is Aharon? It doesn't have a Hebrew meaning. It's Aleph, Haran. It's Haran reincarnated. And now he had another chance here to rectify his sin with idolatry by not building the golden calf and by giving up his life for it. Yunus and Yumbrus and the Erev Rav threatened to kill him if he didn't do it. He should have martyred himself for it. And that would have rectified his previous life, Haran. That's what the Arizal says. Vehutzrach le'areg. He should have martyred himself. Daya min hararuy lo sheimsor atzmo le'ariga kshekamu alav ha'erev Rav. And when they told him, Kum asalanu Elohim, he should have let them kill him. Ve'uta'a, he made a mistake. Why? Because the Erev Rav actually already killed a guy named Chu. You know this? Aaron built the golden calf because the Erev Rav was going so crazy that they killed Chu. And Aaron said, okay, I don't want anybody else to die. I'm going to make this golden calf. And who was Chu? Chu was Abraham's other brother, Nachor. Same letters. Chet Vav Resh. Nachor, Nun, Chet Vav Resh. So it's the same family, like reincarnated here. So he thought, Ki chashav shaya maspik b'ma shehargu et Chu. He thought it's enough that Chu already died. So he said, okay, he already did that martyrdom. It's enough. Shagam hu mishoresh hevel, because he also came from that same spiritual root in hevel. V'lo nitken chet zeh ad Uriah HaKohen. So Aaron didn't rectify the sin of Haran, and he had to reincarnate again in one more person later in Tanakh called Uriah HaKohen. There was another high priest named Uriah, much later in the times of Kings. We actually briefly mentioned him in the class on Damascus. If you remember in December, we did the class on Damascus, and we talked about that episode when there was a war, and the Israelites went all the way, and the Judeans went all the way to Damascus, and they saw the temple altar and said, wow, this is a really cool altar. We want to do the same in Jerusalem. And then the king commanded Uriah to model the Jerusalem temple altar on the Damascus temple altar. And Uriah did so. So again, there's a connection to idolatry, to an idolatrous altar from Damascus, and Uriah built it in Jerusalem. It's the same story that keeps repeating itself, and Uriah HaKohen has the same letters as Aaron. Again, it has Aleph, Hey, Reish, Nun, and Uriah HaKohen. And the Arizal says that ultimately, Achar כך חזר אהרון מתגלגל עוד באוריה, from another Uriah HaKohen מקריית יערים, who was actually a prophet Uriah, ואז נהרג על ידי יהויקים, the king Yehoiakim killed that prophet, ובזה נמחה לו ההריגה שנתחייב במעשה העגל. That's when the sin of the golden calf was fully forgiven, when he reincarnated in Uriah the prophet, because Uriah the prophet, the Tanakh says, I'm not going to go into it, we don't have time, he was a prophet at the same time as Jeremiah, as Yirmiyahu, and was saying a lot of the same things as Yirmiyahu, and the king at the time, Yehoiakim, actually killed him for it. But that was his rectification for Aaron, and amazingly in the Tanakh over there, it says V'yotziu et Uriyahu mimitzrayim, they actually hunted him down in Egypt. Think about Egypt. Why Egypt? Ve'yaviu el hamelech, he ran away to Egypt. But why Egypt? Think about the Erev Rav connection. Ve'yaviu el hamelech Yehoyakim, they brought him before the king. Ve'yakeu becharev, and then they executed him. And look at this. Ve'yashlech et nivlato el kivrei b'nei ha'am, and they threw his corpse in the tombs of Ha'am. So again, there's a symbol. If you understand, there's an allusion here. Remember, Ha'am means the Erev Rav. So if you read the Tanakh on a deeper level, this is fascinating. Because it's saying, it's secretly alluding, why was Uriah the prophet, Uriah HaNavi, killed this way? He actually had to go to Egypt. They captured him in Egypt, brought him back, executed him, and threw him with the corpses of Ha'am. It's alluding to the fact that he was rectified for the Erev Rav, who are called Ha'am, who came from Egypt. Right? They brought him out of Egypt, executed him, and threw him with the corpses of the Ha'am. Right. So now the circle is finally complete, and our own sin is rectified. Amazing. So you see everything step by step. Everything is perfectly, again, Hashem orchestrates all of history. Everybody gets exactly what they deserve in exactly the way. Midah keneged midah. Okay, let's summarize some of what we said. So the biggest mistake that people make about the Erev Rav is assuming that it's secular Jews or Zionist Jews or the Israeli government. It's not that, and really it's not any one particular group. Okay, it's an ideology that manifests itself, as we'll see, in various places, and it specifically is religious. Erev Rav is religious. They claim to be religious, they claim to know God, they claim to know Torah, they know Tumah v'Ta'ara, Isur v'Heter. They're not disconnected from Torah, and they're not atheists. They are religious, and they are very into superstition and things like that, which is religious. If you're an atheist, you're not going to be superstitious. Those two don't go together, right? So that's one mistake, one myth that's important to keep in mind. Another one is assuming that all evil people are Erev Rav. Not true. There's all kinds of evil. And the Erev Rav is not even fully evil. Like we said, there are a mixture of good and evil. There's a lot of goodness there too. There's Nitzotzot Kedusha, and that's why Moshe actually wanted to purify them and rectify them. So it's not that all evil people are Erev Rav, and it's not that Erev Rav are all evil anyways. Okay, the vast majority of evil people are just evil. They're not connected to Erev Rav in any way, and not everybody that's Erev Rav is evil. There's a lot of Erev Rav that are good also, and they're just victims of a certain false ideology. It's a specific type of mindset. And not everything about them is evil. Okay, it's Etz Hadat Tovera, and we just have to purify them. And that's related to the next misunderstanding and a false mode of reasoning, which you can learn from Yunus and Yumbers as well, is this is a mistake that people make all the time. That just because somebody can work miracles or have some Ruach HaKodesh, or seeming Ruach HaKodesh, that they have an extra sense, they have extra sensory perception, they know things. A lot of times people go to a rabbi and say, well, that rabbi did this miracle. He's a miracle worker. Or he knew something about the future. He knew me. But that doesn't mean that he's necessarily holy. He might be holy, but that power can also come from Sitra Achra. It can also come. Bilam was also New Da'at Elyon. Right? Yunus and Yumbers were also great sorcerers and can work magic and can turn their staff into a snake, just like Moshe. So don't confuse a person who's a miracle worker or who knows the future or who knows things about you or has extra senses. That doesn't mean he's holy. Such powers exist actually among all nations, among all peoples. The Muslims have their miracle workers, and the Christians have their miracle workers, and the Hindus have their miracle workers and prophets and psychics and fortune tellers. It doesn't mean anything. Just because a rabbi is a fortune teller means nothing about his actual holiness or how worthy he is as a chacham. Nothing. It could be that power comes from the Sitra Achra. So it's important to remember that as well. It's a very, very common mistake that people make. And it's very common to dupe people into these beliefs with stories. With all kinds of magical stories, miracle stories. About rabbis. We all love rabbi stories. But you have to know that most of them are not true. Okay? So, some of them are. But most of them are not true. Okay? And if you didn't see it with your own eyes, if it didn't happen to you, take it with a grain of salt, okay? A lot of these stories also just make no sense, but people propagate these stories as if they're facts. There's a lot of these cute stories, but they're not. Keep in mind that they're not necessarily true. So I made a little chart with myth, reality. Myth, Erev Rav is secular. Reality, no, they actually present themselves as very religious. Myth, Erev Rav doesn't know Torah. Fact is, no, they actually know Torah very well. Like the Zohar says, they're experts in Tumah v'Ta'ara, Isur v'Heter. Myth, all evil people are Erev Rav. No, most evil people are not, and it's a very specific ideology. Myth that Erev Rav is all evil, not true. Reality is that there's good in there also, and it needs to be purified. Myth that various leaders and rabbis who work wonders or have extrasensory knowledge must be holy. No, not true. Right? To working wonders and having divine information, that can come from the Sitra Achra. It can come from the impure. It can come from Bilam and Yunus and Yumbrus. So that's that. And then some Erev Rav red flags, ideological red flags. If you see people who are focused on machloket, the Zohar calls them ba'alei machloket, dividing people, excluding people. You can't be with us, we can't eat with you, that's not good for me, that's not good for you. You have your ways, we have our ways. Your Torah, our Torah, your Allah, our Allah. It's all this obsession with dividing. Ba'alei machloket, that's precisely what the Zohar that we explored last time says. That's a Erev Rav red flag. Because Erev Rav is all about division and exclusion. We don't want division and exclusion. We want unity. We're all one people. We're all together. We should all be able to collaborate, live together peacefully, and so on. No division. A Galut mindset, people who are stuck in the past, who can't escape their Galut ideology, Galut practices, Galut customs also. That's another red flag. And the superstitious aspects, the magical practices, all of that. The Erev Rav Rava, the magical beliefs. Remember that Kabbalah is rational, it's scientific. If you hear things that are irrational, that's a red flag. But you also have to know what's rational and irrational. Because some people will say, for example, since we talked a lot about reincarnation, some people say reincarnation is irrational. Not true. Reincarnation is actually very rational, very logical, explains many things. Not only that, but we have a very valid scientific explanation for reincarnation. And it was actually suggested by a Nobel Prize winner, Sir Roger Penrose, who won the Nobel Prize in 2020, I believe. And Stuart Hameroff had this theory of the quantum brain, and that their theory explains the afterlife from a scientific perspective, because they're saying that quantum information doesn't have to be lost, and your brain is really just like a little quantum computer that's drawing information from the cosmos at large, and every point in the cosmos can store information. It's an amazing theory. You should look into this. I've spoken about it before. I've written about it. So look up Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. They have a very sound scientific theory based on quantum mechanics that explains how your mind can live on after death, how the information in your brain doesn't actually die when your brain dies. And it could even explain, Dr. Stuart Hameroff talks about this, so he can even explain reincarnation. It's a scientific, very rational scientific theory for reincarnation, and there's scientific evidence to support it. So I'm just using that as one example, that some people think a certain belief is irrational, but if you research it, it actually is very rational and very scientific, and we have empirical evidence for it. So keep that in mind. So reincarnation is a big part of Kabbalah, and when I say that Kabbalah is scientific and rational, reincarnation is a part of that. It is scientific and rational and explains a lot of things. Okay, why is the Erev Rav, just to finish the Mitzrayim bit, because I don't want to go back to Mitzrayim, why is the Erev Rav obsession with connection to magic and superstition? Because it comes from Egypt. And Egyptian society was very superstitious and magical and associated with death. You know, the oldest Egyptian religious text that we have is, we call it the Book of the Dead. And amazingly, the oldest one is dated to the 16th century BC, which is precisely when the Israelites would have been there. So we have the Book of the Dead, this Egyptian holy text, what they considered a holy text. This is something actually really incredible. This holy text, the Book of the Dead, which goes back to the 16th century BC, when Israelites would have been there. So think of the Erev Rav connection around the time of the Exodus. And the whole theme of the Book of the Dead is it's talking about the journey of the soul through the underworld and the afterlife and the underworld. And the underworld is called, in the Book of the Dead, it's called Duat. It's called Dat. Okay. That's the name, the Egyptian name. It's the same root letters. It's Daled, Ain, Taf. So think about it. When our sages say that the Erev Rav is connected to Da'at, that has a double meaning here. Because to the Egyptians in the Book of the Dead, Da'at is their underworld. And they had this fascination with Da'at too. Amazing. That it's the same word. You can look this up. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. So when we say that the Erev Rav is connected to Egyptian stuff, Egyptian beliefs and superstitions, Yunus and Yumbrus, who were Pharaoh's own magicians, they brought that da'at mindset, right? The du'at from the Book of the Dead. And it's the same time period. Historically, archaeologically, the Book of the Dead was produced in the same time period when the Israelites were in Egypt and the Exodus generation. So, the Erev Rav mindset has this obsession with the death and the underworld as well. And instead of focusing on this world, they're often thinking about the next world, even though the Torah is all about this world. The Chumash never mentions an afterlife. The Chumash is all very practical. God wants you to maximize your life here. It's all about self-actualization on this planet, being the best you can be here, living the best life here. All reward and punishment in the Torah is actually here on earth. The Chumash never explicitly even speaks about the afterlife. The focus is on this world. So when people are focused on the next world, you know that that's a problem. Okay? This world doesn't matter. Focus on the next world. It's all about the next world. Suffer in this world. No. You have to, this world does matter. Right? The focus should be on this world. Yes, there's an afterlife, obviously. That's a foundational belief of Judaism. But the obsession with the next world, and spirits in the next world, and talking to people in the next world, and going to constantly to Kivrei Tzadikim and trying to get stuff from them, we talked all about that before, of looking to the dead for salvation, that's a big problem. Right? That's an Erev Rav mentality. You go to Hashem for salvation. Hashem is the God of the living. El Chai, that's one of the names of God. Not the God of the dead, the God of the living. Right? We're Israel Yashar El. We should go straight to Hashem and not through dead people in the past, as great as they were. We talked all about that before in the class on the Kivrei Tzadikim. Remember, the Torah forbids. It's one of the 613 commandments that you're not allowed to be Doresh el Hametim. To seek communication with the dead is an explicit Torah prohibition. Explicit. So that's also, unfortunately, an Erev Rav ideology of constantly being connected to the dead. And I know people will say, oh, but you said the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe went to his father-in-law's grave all the time and spoke to him. That's different. That's different because that was his own personal. He always went to the previous Rebbe's grave, the Lubavitcher Rebbe did. Mm-hmm. But that was very different because that's a personal connection that he went to his father-in-law's grave and he was his mentor and his father-in-law. It's a different story. It's a different story. It's like me going to my grandmother's grave. I have a personal connection with this person. It's a different story. He never went to the graves of all kinds of other people praying for them. He didn't do that. Right? That's different. So I'm just pointing that out because people will say, oh, well, what about, you're saying the Rebbe was detaching from Erev Rav ideology. Him going to the grave of his father-in-law isn't the same as this because that's somebody who had a personal connection. He was going to his mentor's grave. It's not quite the same. So overall, this idea of Doresh el Hametim is a big problem. Now, the second one is even a little bit more surprising and a little bit shocking, but it makes perfect sense. With Pesach coming up, again, I said this is going to make your Pesach Seder more meaningful. What does it say when the Torah says, Et kol avodatam asher avdu ba'em bafarech, that the Egyptians made the Israelites work befarech? What does that mean, befarech? Where did that come from? We talk about this at the Pesach Seder, and some people connect befarech to karpas. That you eat the karpas because it's connected to the hard work that the Egyptians made the Israelites do. It's one of the things about karpas, and we talked about it before. But the Zohar, but the Gemara says in Masechet Sotah, Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yonatan, what does that mean? Avdu ba'em befarech, she'ayu machlifin malechet anashim lenashim. They would make men do women's jobs, u'melechet nashim le'anashim. They would make men do women things and women do male things, men things. They were trying to twist the traditional gender roles. That's also Egyptian ideology, Chazal say. Confusing gender roles. Messing with the traditional family unit. That was in Egypt too. And that's part of the Erev Rav mindset as well. Where do you see the destruction of the traditional family unit and the switching of traditional gender roles? I mean, you see it explicitly on the left. You see it explicitly on the religious left with the Reform Judaism. Again, I'm not saying that Reform Jews are all Erev Rav. I'm not saying that. But you do see that Reform Jews are very vocal, waving their rainbow flags. And they'll do chupot, same-sex marriage. The Torah clearly says, to'eva, it's an abomination. And then they're going to make sheva brachot on two men under the chuppah. How could you do that? It's exactly twisting exactly the opposite of what the Torah is saying. And when we look later next time about the 5 types of Erev Rav, that's actually one type. They're twisting exactly what the Torah is saying, doing the exact opposite. So you see this Egyptian mentality of switching traditional gender roles and mixing the family unit. Men are like women, women are like men, supporting the transgenderism. You see that on the left, with the religious left with Reform. And the truth is, actually, if you think about it, Reform Judaism checks off a lot of the boxes that we spoke about. They claim to be religious, right? They claim to be rabbis. They claim to teach Torah. They do know Torah. They learn Torah in their seminaries. They know Tuma v'Tahara, Isur v'Eter. They just don't follow it. But they know it. Right? They just don't follow it. So they check that box. Mixing with pagan customs, they do that. They love their Chrismaka and their Bark Mitzvahs and doing all kinds of things, of twisting the rituals, of making weird customs. They do that. The Galut mindset, 100%. Reform Judaism at its core is 100% Galut, because Reform gave up anything to do with national Geula, national redemption. They took it out of the Sidur. They don't believe in Mashiach. They don't believe in the third temple. That's why they call their synagogue a temple. They're saying, no, this is our temple. They don't pray for the rebuilding of the third temple or for the coming of Mashiach. Maybe in some communities in recent decades they brought it back a little bit, but overall the Reform ideology was 100% enshrining a Galut mindset and keeping Judaism in Galut forever. That's why some of the most staunch anti-Zionists 100 years ago were Reform Jews. And today also. Oftentimes, who's marching alongside Hamas and the pro-Palestinian protesters? The Reform rabbis. Yeah. And they go on TV and say, oh yeah, we're Jews and we support whatever. It's the same. It's 100% Galut mindset. Right, I'll get to them also. Don't worry. Give me time. So they check off a lot of these boxes, including the switching male and female roles and supporting the whole LGBTQ agenda and the transgenderism and the same-sex chupot and all that stuff. Again, I'm not saying that anybody who associates with Reform is automatically Erev Rav, but that ideology is clearly present there. And what's amazing is you see the same on the other side of the religious spectrum. On the far right, you see a lot of these same things, just like you see the Reform rabbis against the state of Israel, anti-Zionist, marching alongside pro-Palestinians. You see the same thing on the religious right. The Neturei Karta is an extreme example of ultra-orthodox Jews who are very vocally anti-Zionist, waving Palestinian flags, meeting, collaborating with Hamas and Iran. But it's not just them. It's a lot of the Hasidic groups and the Haredi groups are anti-Zionist. They don't support the state of Israel. They don't serve in, they're very vocal against the IDF. They don't want to support the IDF. They don't go to the pro-Israel protest. They don't go to the anti-Israel protest, but they also won't go to the pro-Israel protest. I remember I taught at a Haredi yeshiva for many years. I worked at a Haredi yeshiva for like 7 years. And there was one year where the kids on Purim, as part of their shtick, they brought an Israeli flag. And they actually got suspended. They got in trouble for bringing an Israeli flag. So, you see a lot of the anti-Israel on the Reform side, but you also see a lot of the anti-Israel on the Haredi side. Right? So you see a lot of that. And then with the gender roles also, because the Haredi world in recent decades has switched the traditional gender role. It's now the women that are often the breadwinners. The women have to work. The women go get a secular education and go work, and the men are sitting and learning all day. It always used to be that the man is the breadwinner. That's the traditional family. That's what the Torah says. The Torah says the man has to work. You work by the sweat of your brow. And the religious world, and the Haredi world, I should say, has switched those. Not everybody. Again, not everybody. I'm not saying everybody is Erev Rav. I'm saying that ideology, though, is there, where you have men who don't have any skills, work skills, who don't work. Their wives work. Their wives make all the money, and the men don't. And again, there's a demasculation and emasculation of men, because they're also not encouraged to exercise. They're not encouraged to hit the gym. They're not in the army. They're not fighting. They're weak. They're literally weak, right? They have no strength whatsoever. What happened to the image of the strong Jewish man? Look at King David. Look at Shimshon. They were incredible fight. Moshe, the sages say that they were Baalei Koma, that they had great stature and strength. The Gemara even says in at least 2 places that the Shekhinah does not rest upon a person unless they are Baalei Koma, that they're strong, that they're physically men of stature. What happened to that? Right? Our sages understood that, what a man should be and what a woman should be. So on the left, you see switching gender roles, making women more like men, making men more like women. You see the same thing on the religious right. They're making men more feminine, and they're making women more masculine, encouraging women to go work and make all the money. So it's that, it's very ironic. It's that great horseshoe theory. You know the horseshoe theory? That the people on the far left and on the far right are a lot more similar than they realize. Yeah. So you see a lot of the same Erev Rav ideology in Reform as you see in the Haredi world. Again, I'm going to say this again. I'm going to keep saying it because I don't want the million emails. I'm not saying that everybody who's Reform or everybody who's Haredi is Erev Rav. I'm not saying that. That's obviously not true. I'm saying it's a particular ideology that manifests itself on both sides of the spectrum. Okay? And they're actually a lot more similar, superficially different. But yeah, you see a lot of the same left and right, whether it's the gender stuff, whether it's the anti-Israel sentiment, whether it's adopting customs from their neighbors, right? Reform has adopted a lot of Christian and other customs and made it part of their thing. But so did the people in the Haredi and Hasidic world of adopting various customs from, including the way they dress. We talked about having the Galut dress, right? That they adopted Polish, Eastern European, the streimels and spodeks and kolpiks and the different types of hats and coats that they have. They admit that that came from Polish nobility, that they had adopted the dress of Polish nobility. But why are they still wearing that Galut clothing? It's interesting. And I have dear friends who wear a streimel. So I asked them, I said, why do you wear it? Right? Like, don't you see, even in Israel they wear it. So don't you see, it's like you're transplanting Poland into Israel. Does that make sense? So okay, they have their reasons. It's customary. My Rebbe gave it to me. My father-in-law gave it to me. It's like, okay, it's fine. I get that. But again, going back to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he refused to wear such things. The Lubavitcher Rebbe never wore a streimel or a spodek or any one of these other fur hats, even though his predecessors did. Again, he broke with his predecessors in many ways, and this is one way. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe did wear, the sixth, he did wear on Shabbat the fur hat, a tall one, not the streimel one. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe, not only did he never wore it, he refused to wear it. I heard from Rabbi Groner, the Rebbe's secretary, that there was one year where somebody actually sent the Rebbe a gift from Jerusalem, a very expensive, special streimel, very high quality, as a gift. And the Rebbe sent it back. He said, send it back to Jerusalem. He refused to accept it. So just think about that too, of not dressing like you're in Galut, right? Adopting the dress of they're not necessarily pagan, but of the others, non-Jewish peoples. And I'll talk more about that as well, the history of that. That's something that I've researched a lot. I used to work with Hasidim, really, really serious Hasidim. And I actually asked them also, these are Hasidim that wear streimels. And I asked them, where does this come from? And I tried to I'll talk more about it, maybe in part 3, if we get to it. Because it's something that we don't know much about. At what point exactly did the streimel and the spoda and these hats, this Polish Eastern European dress, at what point did they adopt that? Very murky, but we'll have to come back to it. So again, you see a lot of the same mentality on both sides of the horseshoe on two extremes. And remember, the Jewish path is in the middle. Extremes are never good. The Jewish path is the path of Tiferet. Tiferet is the middle. It's the center of the Sfirot. It's the Sfira of Israel. It's called Emet. It's truth. Titan Emet leYaakov. Right? It's Emet is Tiferet. That's the real place of Israel, and that's what it says in Pirkei Avot, the 2nd chapter. Rebbe Omer, what does Rabbi Yehuda Nasi say? Ezo hi derech yashara sheyavor lo adam. What is the right path, the straight path for a person to walk? Kol shei tiferet leosea, vetiferet lo min adam. It's the path of Tiferet. It's the middle path. You always have to be balanced. The Rambam was also big on this. Everything should be balanced. Right? And then Rabban Gamliel, of course, in the same chapter right after, Rabban Gamliel, bno shel Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Omer, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, Yafet Talmud Torah im derech eretz. You got to learn Torah and have a job. She'egiat shneim mishkachat avon. When you toil in both of them, you toil in Torah and you toil at a job, that's when you will be far from sin. V'chol Torah she'ein ima melacha sofa betela ve'goreret avon. And any Torah that does not come with labor is nothing. Sofa betela. It's nullified and brings a person to sin. So learning Torah all day and not doing anything else, according to Rabban Gamliel, can be bittul Torah, ironically. That's his words, not mine. He's saying it's betela. Kol Torah she'ein mamlacha. If you're not doing any physical labor, if you're not actually producing anything, and you're just sitting and learning all day, sofa betela. I didn't say it. Rabban Gamliel is saying it. So it's always been balance. The Jewish path is always the path, the middle path, the path of balance. Tiferet. That's our sfira. Lo midrash ha'ikar ela ha'maaseh. So identifying the Erev Rav, you know that there's a Erev Rav red flag if it's all about machloket, division, exclusion, Galut mindset, Galut ideology, Galut dress, Galut speech, superstition, magic, death, or underworld, necromancy, all of these things promoting, reversing gender roles, making women more like men, men like women, breaking the traditional family unit. Those are all the Erev Rav red flags, and as you can see, they're found across the spectrum. It's not any one group. In every group, there are good and bad. And again, the Erev Rav is a mixture of all these things, but the cure for it is the path of Tiferet, the middle path. And that's what we have to do to bring Geula. We have to wake people up from these false practices, whether they're on the left or they're on the right or they're Reform or they're Haredi, it doesn't matter. We're all one people. Everybody has a spark of holiness, and we have to rectify. Like Moshe, the task of Moshe, the task of the people. We have to purify, rectify, wake people up from this, bring people back to the balance. Those too far to the right, bring them to pull them left to the center. Those too far on the left, pull them to the right, back to the center, back to Tiferet. That's how we achieve unity. We're all going to be united in the center. That's our task, the Ikvot HaMashiach generation. And just quickly, 5 more minutes and we're done. I just want to say practically what else can we do. I don't want to leave this to part 2 because oftentimes people don't watch part 2. I notice part 1 always gets the most views and then part 2 gets very little. And so I'm going to say this in part 1 just in case people don't watch in part 2. How do we stop or detach from the Erev Rav and not support the Erev Rav? Very straightforward. Number 1, don't give them your money. That's the fuel. We're going to talk next time about one type of Erev Rav is all about sucking money from people, manipulating people for money in the name of Torah. Don't give them your money. Don't fall for the propaganda tricks. Don't fall for give us your money and you'll be blessed. Give us your money and we'll do a Misha Berach for you and we're going to pray for you. And if you do, this is a Zgula. If you buy this bottle of wine, you'll be blessed. If you buy this picture, you'll be blessed. You hear that a lot in these kinds of events. Don't fall for it. Don't participate in it. Your salvation and blessing comes from Hashem, not from giving anybody money, not from people selling you indulgences. It doesn't exist. And if you know that there's a particular place that's an Erev Rav institution that pushes these ideas, that divides, that's all about the things that we talked about, the irrational beliefs, the machloket, the division, the exclusion, the extremes, extreme to the right, extreme to the left, that's promoting reversing the traditional gender roles, that's promoting making men feminine and making women more masculine. Don't go to these places. Don't go to their institutions. Don't go to those shuls. Don't go to their schools. Don't go to their yeshivas. Don't go to their events or shiurim or shabbatons, because that's how they manipulate that, and they'll convince you to join their path. Don't put your kids in their institutions, because that's how it propagates from one generation to the next. Look very carefully at the type of yeshiva that you're going to put your kids to. Look at the curriculum. Is it 100% Gemara? Do they have a rigorous math and science curriculum? Is there an option to take physics and calculus? There should be. Remember, we talked about all the different sources last time, about the importance of learning science. The Rambam said that's the way to find God, is to study his work. The Vilna Gaon said, we quoted this last time, to the extent that one lacks knowledge of the natural forces, of the sciences, he'll lack 100 times in Torah. You can't understand Torah properly unless you also have a foundational basic knowledge, basic communication skills, reading, writing, language, math, science, history. You have to look, what's the curriculum there? You have to look at, is there a focus on mental health and physical well-being? Do they have a gym? Do the kids exercise? Is there a gym sports program? Because a lot of yeshivas don't. Like, people have told me when I was in yeshiva, I wanted to exercise, they didn't let me. I wanted to go to the gym, they didn't let me. I had to get a special permission to go to the gym under the condition that, I wouldn't bring anybody with me. It had to be secret at night, like all kinds of things. Again, when I worked at this Haredi yeshiva, oftentimes you would hear the Rebbeim treat sports as bittul Torah. And the Rambam says the exact opposite. Amazing. The Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim that a person has to exercise, right, for briut. And he says, what should a person do? Mischak bekadur, play ball games, play ball sports. The Rambam says, evakut, wrestling, haka beyadayim, boxing, and various martial arts, atzirat neshima, breathing exercises, various meditations. So these are the things that you need to do for briut. Etzel anashim burim, among ignoramuses, tiyazu peulat mischak. Ignoramuses say these are just games and bittul Torah and waste of time. Aval etzel amelumadim, right? The wise ones understand that it's not a game. It's absolutely necessary for your health, for your mental, physical health. Kids need to play, and so adults also need to exercise. Right? There's incredible studies that were done that showed I'll share one amazing study that when you exercise, your blood produces cancer-killing compounds. They took a group of men who exercised on a bike for an hour. They took their blood before and after, and they put the blood on prostate cancer cells. The blood that they took after the exercise, after 1 hour of exercise, actually stopped the cancer from growing and was killing the cancer. And they don't know why. The blood serum from the people who exercised killed the cancer, and the blood serum from before exercise didn't. So there's actually something about exercise that kills cancer. It's absolutely vital. The Rambam knew this. It's not a mischak. It's actually absolutely vital to your health. We have a mitzvah to guard your souls. So you're going to put your kids in the yeshiva. Don't just look at the Beit Midrash. I promise you the Beit Midrash are all beautiful. Look at the gymnasium. Look over there. Is there a weight room? Is there a clear program for exercise, sports? That's all part of health. That's all part of being a Jew. Remember, the Shekhinah doesn't rest upon a person. Ruach HaKodesh doesn't rest upon a person unless they're physically in good health. So this is all important. When you're thinking about where to put your kids to school or where you're going to go to school, think about the institutions. And finally, and I'm done, just talk to people about these ideas, right? Ask people. You see people who subscribe to these false ideologies, talk to them about it. Bring up these sources. Bring up the Rambams and the Gemaras and the Zohars. And let's talk about this, because it's not being talked about. It's being swept under the rug. And if we want to bring Geulah, we have to end the Galut mindset. If we want to bring Geulah, like the Zohar says, we have to end the Erev Rav ideology. So talk to people about these things. Talk to people about the schools that they're going to. Are there schools learning Tanakh? Are there schools learning science? Do the schools have mental health, physical health programs? Right? Ask them, how do you if their kids are in a program that's all Gemara, ask them, how do you justify that? Don't you think they should know these and these and these things? If our men who are just sitting in work and in Kollel and their wives work, like you said, and have all these responsibilities and they're miserable and suffering, ask them, how do you justify this? How exactly do you explain it in light of what the Gemara says, what the Mishnah says? Talk to people about these issues. Talk to rabbis about these issues, Rosh Yeshivas. What are they doing with the Aguna crisis and with the Shidduch crisis and with all the abuse in the community? What are people doing to stop these issues? And how do we justify chumrot and extra stringencies, things that are not in the Mishnah Torah or in the Shulchan Aruch, and pagan customs that have been adopted, unknown customs and dresses and all kinds of things? Talk to people about it. And have a conversation, share the videos, share the resources, share the source, and have a conversation. And hopefully, step by step, little by little, it's up to each of us to actually reach out to our family and friends and community and wake people up to bring about the Geulah mindset that we want. So we'll end here and we'll do next time part 2, and we'll go deeper into exactly what the different types of Erev Rav are and how we can rectify them. So we'll continue the conversation next time. So we'll pause here.